The cardboard box hit my desk with a thud that echoed through the safety office like a judge's gavel. Preston Aldridge stood there in his $1,000 suit, checking his Apple Watch, while Claire from HR avoided my eyes like I was radioactive. "Your old school methods are holding us back, Garrett," he said, not even bothering to look up from his screen. "We're pivoting to predictive analytics and AI-driven safety protocols. Your services are no longer required. I'm 48 years old, and I'd spent 18 years keeping Coastal Chemical Manufacturing's Texas facility from becoming a smoking crater in the Gulf Coast dirt. Before that, 6 years in the Navy as a damage control specialist taught me that safety isn't about algorithms and dashboards. It's about understanding that every valve, every pressure reading, every seemingly minor protocol exists because someone, somewhere, died when it wasn't followed. My name's Garrett Wade, and this is the story of how they fired me for being old school, then begged me to come back 72 hours later when their new team nearly killed everyone in a 3-mile radius. Let me back up. Way back to 2006, when I walked through Coastal Chemical's gates for the first time. Fresh out of the Navy, divorce papers still warm from the lawyer's office, and a 6-year-old son who needed stability more than I needed pride. The facility was a disaster waiting to happen. My predecessor had quit without notice after the second OSHA violation in 6 months, leaving behind scattered files and a safety culture that treated regulations like suggestions. The plant manager at the time, Hugh Brennan, was desperate. "Fix this or we're getting shut down," he told me on day 1. "You've got 6 months to turn it around." I didn't have a fancy degree. What I had was 6 years of keeping sailors alive on an aircraft carrier where one mistake could sink the ship. I started by walking every inch of that facility, notebook in hand, learning every system, every quirk, every place where theory met reality, and reality won. Within 3 months, I'd rebuilt our entire safety program from the ground up. New training protocols, updated documentation, emergency response drills that actually prepared people instead of checking boxes. But the real work was quieter. I started building relationships with the people who actually mattered. Vernon Briggs was the OSHA regional inspector assigned to our sector. Most companies treated inspectors like enemy combatants. I treated Vernon like the professional he was. Learned he'd worked offshore rigs for 15 years before joining OSHA, that his daughter Bailey was studying environmental engineering at A&M, that his wife had beaten breast cancer 2 years prior. When Vernon came for inspections, I didn't hide problems. I showed him what we'd found, what we'd fixed, and what we were working on. Built trust one honest conversation at a time. By year 3, Vernon would call me before issuing new guidance. "Garrett, this is coming down the pipeline next quarter. Thought you'd want a heads up." That kind of relationship saved Coastal Chemical roughly $40 million in fines and violations over the years. Not because we cheated the system, but because we stayed ahead of it. In 2011, when the new vapor emission standards rolled out, we were already compliant because Vernon had tipped me off 6 months early. In 2014, when neighboring facilities got hammered for inadequate emergency response plans, we passed with commendation because I'd attended Vernon's presentation at the Regional Safety Conference and implemented his recommendations before they became requirements. I documented everything. Every inspection, every conversation, every close call. Kept detailed logs in my handwriting, the old-fashioned way. Dates, names, technical specs, family details that helped me remember these were people, not obstacles. Vernon's birthday was April 12th. His favorite coffee was from that little shop on Harbor Boulevard. 2 sugars, no cream. His daughter's graduation was May 18th, 2019. I sent a card. These weren't manipulations. This was respect. And respect over 18 years becomes something stronger than any compliance software could ever generate. It becomes trust, But it wasn't just external relationships. Inside the facility, I knew every worker by name. Terry Maddox in maintenance had worked here 22 years, knew the pump systems better than the engineers who designed them. Beth Cordova in the lab could smell when a chemical reaction was trending wrong before instruments caught it. Russell Peck in operations had prevented 3 major incidents through pure institutional knowledge. I made sure their expertise was documented, their insights respected, their concerns heard. When corporate sent down new protocols that didn't account for real-world conditions, I'd push back with data from the floor. Sometimes I won, sometimes I lost, but I never ignored what my people were telling me. By 2018, Coastal Chemical's safety record was spotless. 0 major violations, minimal minor findings. When issues came up, we fixed them immediately, documented thoroughly, and used them as teaching moments. Our incident rate was 94% below industry average. Our insurance premiums were the lowest in the region. And Vernon Briggs would tell other inspectors that our facility was the standard everyone else should meet. That reputation wasn't built on software. It was built on relationships, experience, and the kind of institutional knowledge that takes 2 decades to develop. Then everything changed when Dalton Aldridge's nephew graduated from MIT. But before we get to that, let me tell you about the cost. My ex-wife Sarah left in 2005, said she couldn't handle the Navy lifestyle anymore. The divorce was bitter but brief. She got the house in California. I got custody of Dylan. He was 6 years old when we moved to Texas, scared and confused about why his family had exploded. Those first years at Coastal Chemical, I was working 70-hour weeks, rebuilding the safety program, handling emergency call-outs at 3 a.m., flying to compliance conferences on weekends. Dylan stayed with my sister Jenny when I couldn't be there, which was too often. I missed his first Little League home run because I was managing a chemical spill response drill. Missed his 7th birthday because OSHA had scheduled a surprise inspection. Missed his school science fair 3 years running because something always came up. By the time Dylan turned 14, we had a relationship that was more functional than connected. He was a good kid, smart like his mother, but there was a distance between us that my work schedule had carved out like a canyon. "Dad, why do you even come home?" he asked once when I'd canceled our fishing trip for the 4th time because of an emergency. "I'm here more than you are anyway." That hit harder than any OSHA citation ever could. But I told myself it was temporary. Work hard now, build security, eventually things would balance out. That's the lie we tell ourselves, isn't it? That the sacrifice is temporary. That someday we'll have time, that our kids will understand we were doing it for them. The promotion conversation happened on a Thursday morning in March. I'd been safety director for 12 years by then. I'd prepared a comprehensive presentation for Dalton Aldridge, our CEO, showing how our safety performance had saved the company $180 million in avoided violations, reduced insurance costs, and prevented production shutdowns over the past decade. I had metrics, trend analyses, documentation of every innovation I'd implemented. Dalton flipped through my portfolio for maybe 3 minutes before setting it aside. "Garrett, I appreciate everything you've done," he said, his voice carrying that tone executives use when they've already made their decision and they're just waiting for you to catch up. "But the board feels we need to modernize our approach to safety management. Younger perspective, fresh ideas, data-driven methodologies." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Younger perspective. "Preston's joining us next week," Dalton continued. "My nephew. Just finished his MBA at MIT, specialized in operational risk management and predictive analytics. He'll be taking over as Director of Safety Innovation." Innovation. There was that word. The corporate buzzword that meant someone with no experience was about to tell people with decades of expertise how to do their jobs. And my role, I asked, keeping my voice neutral the way the Navy taught me. You'll transition to Senior Safety Advisor. You'll help Preston get up to speed, show him the ropes, provide continuity during the transition, help him get up to speed. I'd spent 18 years building relationships, systems, and knowledge that kept this facility running safely. And they wanted me to spend my time teaching my replacement how to do a job he wasn't qualified for. Preston's very bright, Dalton added. Like that settled everything, top 5% of his class. He's developed some revolutionary ideas about using machine learning for safety prediction. I'm sure you two will work well together. I stood up, gathered my portfolio, and shook Dalton's hand with the same professional courtesy I'd maintained for 18 years. When does Preston start? Monday. I'd appreciate if you could prepare some orientation materials over the weekend. Just the basics, help him hit the ground running. I nodded once and walked out. But instead of going back to my office, I walked to my truck in the parking lot. I sat there for 20 minutes, engine off, staring at the chemical processing towers in the distance. The same towers I'd kept safe for 18 years. The same facility where I'd prevented disasters Dalton would never even know about because prevention doesn't make headlines. That's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to quit in anger. I wasn't going to sabotage anything. I was going to do something much more surgical. I was going to work exactly to my job description, nothing more. See, my official title was Senior Safety Advisor as of that conversation, and my job description was straightforward. Provide safety guidance within assigned scope, maintain regulatory documentation, coordinate with relevant departments as needed. Standard corporate language that didn't come close to capturing what I actually did every day. What I actually did was arrive at 06:30 hours to review overnight incident reports before anyone else. I answered emergency calls at any hour because chemical safety doesn't respect business hours. I maintained personal relationships with inspectors that took years to build. I solved problems before they became violations, staying late to ensure nothing exploded overnight. But my job description said, provide safety guidance within assigned scope. So that's exactly what I was going to do. Nothing more, nothing less. I drove home that Thursday evening and did something I hadn't done in years. I walked through the door at 17:30 hours. Dylan was in the living room, sprawled on the couch with his phone, and he looked up with genuine confusion. Dad, why are you home? Everything okay? I decided my time was more valuable than I thought, I told him. Want to throw a football around before dinner? His face went through about 5 emotions in 2 seconds. Confusion, suspicion, hope, excitement. Finally settled on cautious optimism. Yeah. Sure, that'd be cool. We spent an hour in the backyard just throwing passes, talking about school, his friends, the spring semester, normal father-son stuff I'd been too busy to do for too long. When we came inside, he was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Dad, he said as we sat down to the pizza I'd ordered, is this going to be like a regular thing? Or just today? Regular thing, I told him. I've been working too much. Time to fix that. Monday morning, Preston Aldridge arrived at Coastal Chemical like a conquering emperor. He'd turned my old office into what he called a safety innovation hub. 3 monitors, a standing desk, some kind of app running on all the screens, showing real-time data visualizations. He wore designer jeans and a blazer, carried a leather notebook with his initials embossed on the cover. Garrett, great to meet you, he said, extending his hand with the kind of confidence that comes from never being wrong because you've never been tested. Uncle Dalton's told me so much about your work here. Really looking forward to learning from your experience before we pivot to next-generation protocols. Next-generation protocols. I shook his hand and smiled politely. Happy to help however I can. What would you like to know? Well, first off, I've been reviewing the incident data from the past 5 years, and I'm seeing some concerning patterns. Your reactive approach to safety has some significant gaps that predictive analytics can address. Reactive approach. Interesting characterization for a safety program that had 0 major violations in 18 years. For instance, Preston continued, tapping his screen, "You've been conducting weekly equipment inspections when monthly would be more efficient from a resource allocation standpoint. The AI model I built at MIT shows we can reduce inspection frequency by 60% while maintaining the same safety levels." I nodded slowly. Those weekly inspections catch minor issues before they become major problems. The monthly data wouldn't show you the problems we prevented. He smiled like I was a child who didn't understand math. That's exactly the old-school thinking we need to move past. Modern risk assessment is about data-driven prediction, not anecdotal observation. Old school. There was that phrase, the one they'd use to justify every corner they cut, every relationship they burned, every piece of institutional knowledge they discarded. Over the next 3 days, I watched Preston dismantle 18 years of work with the confidence of someone who'd never seen what happens when safety systems fail. He reduced inspection frequencies across the board, changed our documentation processes to a new digital system that looked impressive, but eliminated the detailed notes that actually mattered. He started scheduling meetings with OSHA inspectors through official channels instead of maintaining the personal relationships I'd built. And he kept using phrases like optimize resource allocation and leverage predictive modeling, while actual safety professionals watched with growing concern. Tuesday afternoon, Beth Cordova from the lab stopped by my new office, which was really just a desk in the corner of the administrative wing. "Garrett," she said quietly, "Preston just cut the weekly vapor monitoring checks. Said the sensors can handle it." "Those sensors missed the early warning signs you taught me to look for," I replied. "They measure concentration, not behavioral changes in the chemical reactions." "Exactly. So what do we do?" "Follow the new protocols," I told her. "Document everything. If you see something concerning, report it through proper channels." Beth stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You're just going to let him wreck everything you built?" "I'm going to do exactly what my job description says," I replied evenly. "Provide safety guidance within assigned scope. Preston's the director now. These are his calls to make." She walked away, shaking her head, and I felt that cold weight in my stomach again. But I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to enable a broken system anymore. Wednesday brought more changes. Preston sent an email to the entire facility announcing the new Predictive Safety Protocol initiative, complete with buzzwords about digital transformation, data-driven decision-making, and optimized operational efficiency. The email didn't mention that he'd cut our emergency response drill frequency in half to save time. Didn't mention that he'd canceled the quarterly meetings with Vernon Briggs because they weren't on OSHA's required meeting schedule. Didn't mention that he'd decided the detailed inspection logs I'd maintained for 18 years were unnecessary paperwork. Terry Maddox caught me in the hallway that afternoon, his face showing the kind of concern that comes from 22 years of keeping dangerous equipment from killing people. "Preston's saying we can run Reactor 3 at higher pressure than you specified in the safety margins," Terry said. "Claims his model shows we've been too conservative." "What do you think?" "I think Preston's the director of safety innovation," I replied. "If he's approved new operating parameters, that's within his authority." "Garrett, come on. You know that reactor's temperamental. We built in those margins for good reason. Then document your concerns and submit them through proper channels," I said. "Make sure everything's in writing." Terry looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, understanding what I wasn't saying out loud. By Thursday evening, I was home by 1800 hours for the 4th night in a row. Dylan and I cooked dinner together. Burgers on the grill, him telling me about some drama with his friends at school. Normal teenage stuff. "Dad, this is weird," he said, flipping a burger with the kind of concentration I recognized from his mother. "But good weird, like you're actually here." "I've been working too much for too long," I told him. Took me a while to figure that out. Friday morning, I arrived at exactly 0900 hours, not 0630 like I'd done for 18 years. My job description said standard business hours. Preston was in the hallway talking with Russell Peck, who looked increasingly frustrated. "The new inspection schedule doesn't account for the thermal cycling variations," Russell was saying. "We need more frequent checks during temperature transitions." "That's old methodology," Preston replied, shaking his head. "The predictive model accounts for thermal variations automatically. We don't need manual verification anymore." Russell saw me approaching and his expression shifted to something between relief and desperation. "Garrett, tell him, you wrote the original thermal monitoring protocols." I deferred to Preston with a slight nod. "Preston's the director now. If he's confident in the new model, that's his call." Russell stared at me like I'd betrayed everything we'd built together. Then he walked away without another word. That afternoon, I was updating documentation in my corner office when my phone rang. Vernon Briggs. "Garrett, we've got a scheduled quarterly inspection next Tuesday," Vernon said. "Want to grab coffee Monday to go over anything I should know about? I've been busy with some family stuff, so I haven't been keeping up with your latest updates." I felt that cold weight again. I'd been meeting with Vernon informally before inspections for 18 years. Coffee, lunch, sometimes just a phone call. He'd give me insights about what OSHA was focusing on. I'd update him on our latest improvements. It was how we stayed ahead of problems. "Actually, Vernon, I should probably let Preston handle that," I said. "He's our new Director of Safety Innovation. Might be good for you two to build that relationship directly." There was a pause on the line. "Preston, Dalton's nephew? Interesting. He reached out last week through the formal request portal. Seemed more interested in demonstrating his new software than actually discussing the facility." I didn't say anything. "All right," Vernon said, his tone careful. "I'll see you Tuesday then. Usual time. 0900 hours? 0900 sounds good," I confirmed, then ended the call. I sat there for a long time after that, staring at my phone. 18 years of relationship building with Vernon Briggs. 18 years of trust, respect, and the kind of professional partnership that kept everyone safe. And Preston had reduced it to a formal request portal. The consequences were going to be spectacular. Friday evening, Dylan had a baseball game. I'd missed his last 8 games because of work. Always some emergency that needed my attention. Tonight, I was in the stands at 1830 hours, watching him pitch. He saw me in the crowd during warm-ups, and his whole face lit up. 3 innings later, he struck out the side, then looked straight at me in the stands and grinned. After the game, we went for ice cream. Just the two of us. Sitting outside a shop on Harbor Boulevard, him talking about his pitches, and I actually listened instead of checking my work phone every 5 minutes. "You know what's different, Dad?" Dylan said, working on his chocolate cone. "You're here. Like, really here. Not just physically here, but mentally here too." Smart kid. Just like his mother. "I'm sorry it took me so long to figure that out." He shrugged. "Better late than never, right? Coach says you never watched me pitch before. I told him my dad was always working, but now he knows you showed up." That hit me harder than anything Preston had said all week. My son had been telling his coach that his father was always working. 14 years old, and his main memory of me was absence. The weekend was strange. For the first time in 18 hours, I didn't check email, didn't review incident reports, didn't prepare briefing materials for Monday meetings. Just spent time with Dylan. We went fishing Saturday morning, caught nothing, didn't matter. Fixed his bike Saturday afternoon. Watched some movie Sunday evening that he'd been wanting to see. "This is weird," he said Sunday night. "But I could get used to it." "Me too," I told him. Monday morning, I arrived at work at 0900 hours exactly. No early prep, no getting ahead of the day. Claire from HR looked surprised when I walked past her desk at 9 instead of being there for 2 hours already. Preston was in conference room B, presenting his new safety dashboard to the department heads. I could hear him through the glass walls, talking about machine learning algorithms and predictive modeling. The executives were nodding along like they understood, impressed by the flashy graphics on his screens. What they didn't understand was that those graphics showed lagging indicators, historical data patterns. They couldn't predict the kind of problems that come from cutting inspection frequencies and ignoring institutional knowledge. Tuesday morning. Inspection day. I arrived at 0850 hours, 10 minutes early, and went straight to the main gate to meet Vernon. He pulled up in his government SUV at exactly ~900, carrying his standard inspection clipboard and looking more formal than usual. "Garrett," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm, but his expression was carefully neutral. "Ready for today's inspection?" "Ready as always," I replied. "Preston's inside. He's eager to show you his new systems." "We'll see," Vernon said, and something in his tone told me this wasn't going to be a routine inspection. Preston met us in the lobby wearing a suit that probably cost more than Vernon's monthly salary. "Inspector Briggs, great to finally meet you in person," Preston said, extending his hand. "I've prepared a comprehensive presentation on our new predictive safety protocol system. I think you'll be impressed by how we're revolutionizing safety management." Vernon shook his hand with professional courtesy that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's start with the facility walkthrough. I like to see operations before presentations." Preston's smile flickered. "Of course. Though I should mention we've optimized our inspection routes for maximum efficiency. The new protocol reduces walkthrough time by 40%. Vernon's expression didn't change. "We'll use the standard inspection route, same as always. Shall we?" For the next hour, I followed Vernon and Preston through the facility, saying nothing unless directly asked. Vernon's inspection style hadn't changed in 18 years. Thorough, methodical, asking detailed questions about specific systems. Preston tried to redirect conversations toward his predictive model, but Vernon kept bringing it back to physical systems. "Show me the vapor monitoring logs for Reactor 3, Vernon said, stopping at the chemical processing unit. Preston pulled out his tablet, tapping through screens. The digital system aggregates the data automatically. Here's the 30-day trend analysis. Vernon frowned. "I want to see the daily readings, not aggregated trends. Daily readings show variance patterns that aggregated data smooths out." "We've moved past daily manual readings," Preston explained. "The sensors report every hour, and the AI flags anomalies." "Flagging anomalies is reactive," Vernon said, his tone getting sharper. "Daily manual readings let experienced operators catch problems before they become anomalies." "That's old methodology," Preston replied, actually sounding dismissive. "Modern safety management is about letting technology handle routine monitoring so humans can focus on strategic analysis." Vernon turned to me. "Garrett, where are the manual reading logs?" I looked at Preston, then back to Vernon. Preston eliminated manual readings 3 weeks ago, transitioned to automated monitoring only. Vernon's jaw tightened. "Show me the emergency response drill records." Again, Preston pulled up his tablet. "We've optimized the drill schedule. Instead of monthly drills, we're doing quarterly simulations that use virtual reality to—" "Monthly drills are minimum requirement," Vernon interrupted. "Not quarterly. Not virtual. Monthly, physical, documented drills with actual equipment. Preston's confident smile was starting to crack. The research shows that spaced practice with high-quality simulation provides better training outcomes than frequent repetitive drills. Research? Vernon's voice had gone flat, the tone OSHA inspectors use right before they start citing violations. I've worked industrial safety for 23 years. I've seen what happens when facilities cut corners on emergency preparedness. Real drills with real equipment save real lives. Research doesn't mean much when people are burning. The inspection continued, and it kept getting worse. Every system Preston had changed, every protocol he'd optimized, every process he'd eliminated, Vernon documented with increasingly concerning notes on his clipboard. The atmospheric monitoring Preston had reduced to monthly checks. Vernon found 3 sensors that hadn't been calibrated in 6 weeks when weekly calibration was required. The inspection routes Preston had optimized for efficiency? They skipped critical pressure relief valves that needed regular visual inspection. The training program Preston had digitized. It eliminated hands-on emergency response practice that OSHA regulations specifically required. By 1300 hours, Vernon called for a break. Conference Room A, Preston, Dalton, and whoever else runs this facility. Preston's face had gone pale. The confident MIT graduate who'd been revolutionizing safety management looked like he'd just realized he was in serious trouble. 15 minutes later, we were all in Conference Room A. Vernon, Preston, Dalton, CFO Marcus Holbrook, and me. Vernon opened his inspection folder with the kind of careful precision that meant very bad news. I'm documenting 12 serious violations of OSHA safety protocols, Vernon said. Inadequate emergency response preparedness, insufficient monitoring equipment calibration, failure to maintain required inspection frequencies, and reduction of mandated training requirements. Preston tried to interrupt. If you'd just let me explain the predictive model. The model isn't OSHA compliant, Vernon cut him off. Your optimizations have created systemic safety failures across this entire facility. I'm issuing a notice of serious violation with mandatory corrective action within 30 days. Dalton leaned forward, his face showing the first real concern I'd seen from him in years. Vernon, we've had a perfect safety record for nearly 2 decades. Surely we can work through this. You had a perfect safety record when Garrett was running your safety program, Vernon corrected. In the 3 weeks since you put Preston in charge, you've systematically dismantled every protection that kept you compliant. Dalton's eyes shifted to me, then back to Vernon. We're implementing modern safety methodologies. There's nothing modern about increasing your risk of killing your employees, Vernon said, his voice hard. These aren't minor paperwork issues. These are fundamental safety failures that create imminent danger. He pulled out a second document, this one on OSHA official letterhead. Based on the violations I've documented, I'm recommending immediate operational restrictions until corrective actions are completed and verified. That means limited production capacity, increased inspection frequency, and potential facility shutdown if you don't demonstrate adequate safety compliance within 30 days. The room went completely silent. Operational restrictions meant production cuts. Production cuts meant revenue loss. Revenue loss meant the board would be asking very uncomfortable questions about why the company's perfect safety record had suddenly exploded. Vernon stood up, gathering his documentation. I'll be filing my report by end of business today. You'll receive the official violation notice within 48 hours. Corrective action plan is due 15 days after that. I'll be back in 30 days for verification inspection. He paused at the door and looked directly at me. Garrett, you know my number if you need to discuss anything. Then he walked out, leaving behind a conference room full of people who just realized they'd made a very expensive mistake. The silence lasted maybe 5 seconds before Dalton exploded. What the hell just happened? Preston tried to respond, his voice shaky. Uncle Dalton, I can explain. The inspector didn't understand the technical sophistication of... He understood perfectly, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. Preston's changes violated multiple OSHA requirements. The inspector documented exactly what was wrong. Preston's face went red. This is your fault. You didn't properly transition the information. You sabotaged me. I did exactly what you asked, I replied, keeping my voice level. I provided safety guidance within my signed scope. You made the decisions. You approved the changes. You're the director of safety innovation. But you didn't warn me about the inspection requirements. Preston shot back, desperation creeping into his voice. You've been here 18 years. You should have told me what not to change. My job description says provide safety guidance within assigned scope, I said, not manage the director's decisions. You wanted to modernize the safety program. You did that. Preston looked like he might throw up. Dalton's expression had shifted from angry to calculating. Marcus Holbrook, the CFO, was running numbers on his laptop, and from his expression, those numbers were very bad. Garrett, Dalton said carefully. What's it going to take to fix this? I checked my watch. Fix what exactly? Fix the violations. Get Vernon to rescind the operational restrictions. I don't think Vernon rescinds violations, I replied. He's very thorough about following protocols. He's been that way for the 18 years I've known him. Dalton leaned forward. You've known him 18 years. You have a relationship with him. I had a relationship with him, I corrected. Past tense. Preston's been handling inspector communications through the formal request portal for the past 3 weeks. That's a very different kind of relationship. The implications sank in slowly. The personal relationship, the trust, the informal communication that had kept Coastal Chemical ahead of regulatory problems for 18 years. That was gone, replaced by formal request portals and official channels. Preston had destroyed in 3 weeks what took me nearly 2 decades to build. Marcus looked up from his laptop, his face ashen. The operational restrictions Vernon mentioned would cost us approximately $2.3 million per week in reduced production capacity. If this extends to the full 30 days, we're looking at nearly $10 million in direct losses. That's not counting the violation fines, which could range from $50,000 to $200,000, depending on severity. Dalton's face went pale. What are our options? Marcus glanced at me, then back to Dalton. We need someone who can work with OSHA to develop an acceptable corrective action plan. Someone who understands both our operations and their requirements. Someone Vernon trusts. Someone they fired 3 weeks ago, I added helpfully. Dalton stood up abruptly. Preston, Claire, Marcus, give us the room. I need to speak with Garrett privately. Everyone filed out, Preston looking like a condemned man walking to execution. When the door closed, Dalton sat back down heavily. Name your price, Garrett. Tell me what you want. I considered the question for a long moment, thinking about Dylan's baseball games I'd missed, the 18 years of 70-hour weeks, the institutional knowledge I'd built, that they'd tossed aside for a kid with a fancy degree and no experience. What I want is my old office back, I said. Not senior safety advisor. Director of safety. Direct report to CEO. Not through Preston. Full authority over all safety operations, no committee approvals, no oversight from people who don't understand the work. Done. What else? 65% salary increase. Retroactive to the day Preston started. Back pay included. Dalton winced but nodded. Done. Continue. I want Preston to remain in the company, I said. Dalton's eyebrows went up in surprise. You want him to stay? As my deputy, I continued. Learning role, No decision authority, minimum 6 months. If he wants to work in safety, he needs to learn how it actually works. Not from textbooks and algorithms, but from walking facilities at 0300 hours during emergency shutdowns. And if I'm going to fix the mess he created, he's going to watch every step and understand why his modern approach nearly killed people. Dalton was quiet for a moment. That's humiliating for him. Good, I replied. Humiliation builds humility. He needs both. One more thing, I said. I want a public acknowledgement. What kind of acknowledgement? All hands meeting. This Friday, you, me, Preston, and every employee in this facility. You explain what happened, why it happened, and what's changing. I want everyone to understand that experience and relationships matter. That old school isn't an insult, it's a methodology that keeps people alive. Dalton looked like he wanted to argue, but the math was brutal. 10 million in production losses, hundreds of thousands in fines, and a destroyed safety reputation that took 18 years to build. Against his ego and his nephew's feelings, there was no comparison. Friday, he agreed finally. All hands at 1400 hours. I'll make the announcement. I stood up. I'll start working on the corrective action plan this afternoon. Vernon knows my work. If I'm leading the response, he'll work with us. Dalton nodded slowly, looking older than he had an hour ago. Garrett, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. We made a mistake. Yes, you did, I replied. And it's going to cost you about $12 million to fix it. Probably more if you count the reputational damage. I walked out of that conference room and went straight to my old office, which was still labeled Safety Innovation Hub. Preston was there, frantically typing on his laptop, probably trying to figure out how to spin this disaster on his LinkedIn. Pack up, I said from the doorway. This is my office again. Preston looked up, his face a mixture of humiliation and anger. My uncle said I'm staying on as your deputy. That's right. You're going to learn how safety actually works. First lesson starts now. Pack your things, move to the administrative wing, and then meet me in the parking lot. We're going to rewalk Vernon's inspection route, and you're going to document every violation he cited. By hand, in a notebook, not on a tablet. Second lesson is tomorrow at 0630 hours. Preston stared. That's 6:30 in the morning. Yes, it is. That's when safety work starts. Not at 9 a.m. after your yoga class and oat milk latte. We prevent disasters by getting ahead of them, not by reacting with algorithms after people are already dead. For a moment, I thought he might quit. His face cycled through about 5 emotions, finally landing on something close to resigned humiliation. He started packing his desk in silence. That afternoon, I called Vernon Briggs. Vernon, it's Garrett. I understand I'm back in charge of safety operations. Heard about that, Vernon said, and I could hear the carefully controlled amusement in his voice. Dalton called me about an hour ago. Very apologetic. Said you'd be developing the corrective action plan. I'm putting together a comprehensive response to every violation you cited, I told him. Should have it to you by Monday. I'd appreciate if you'd review it informally before I submit it officially. Make sure we're addressing everything correctly. Vernon was quiet for a moment. Monday's fine. And Garrett? Your daughter's graduation is coming up in May, I said, checking my mental notes. Environmental engineering from A&M, right? Vernon laughed, some of the tension breaking. Some things never change. Yeah, she graduates May 15th, 1400 hours ceremony. I'll send a card, I told him. And Vernon, I'm sorry about the past 3 weeks. That wasn't how I wanted things to go. Water under the bridge, he replied. Just fix this place before someone gets hurt. Will do. We ended the call, and I sat back in my chair, my old chair, in my old office. 18 years of relationship building nearly destroyed in 3 weeks. But relationships, real relationships built on respect and trust, they're resilient. They bend, but they don't break easily. Unlike Preston's machine learning algorithms. Friday afternoon, all hands meeting at 1400 hours. Every employee at Coastal Chemical was packed into the main assembly area, about 180 people total. Production workers in their coveralls, lab techs in white coats, engineers, maintenance, administrative staff. Everyone knew something major had happened, but most didn't know the details yet. Dalton stood at the podium, looking uncomfortable in a way I'd never seen from him before. Preston sat in the front row, his face carefully blank, but his hands gripped tightly in his lap. I stood off to the side, watching. 3 weeks ago, Dalton began, his voice carrying across the silent room, I made a decision that nearly cost this company everything we've built over the past 2 decades. He paused, and you could hear people shifting nervously. I replaced our safety director, Garrett Wade, with someone less experienced because I believed modern credentials were more important than institutional knowledge. I was wrong. The silence was absolute. I allowed my nephew Preston to implement changes to our safety program that violated federal regulations, damaged our relationship with OSHA, and created serious safety risks for every person in this facility. Because of my decision, we received 12 serious violations this week. Violations that could result in fines exceeding $200,000 and production restrictions costing us millions of dollars. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. But more importantly, Dalton continued, his voice harder now, those violations created real danger. Not theoretical risk from a spreadsheet, but actual physical danger that could have resulted in injuries or deaths. Several people looked at Preston, who was staring at the floor like he could disappear through it. I'm announcing today that Garrett Wade is returning as Director of Safety, effective immediately, Dalton said. He has full authority over all safety operations, reports directly to me, and will be restructuring the department to prevent this situation from ever happening again. Garrett, would you like to say anything? I walked to the podium slowly, looking out at faces I'd known for years. Terry Maddox, who'd been worried about Reactor 3 pressures. Beth Cordova, who'd questioned the monitoring changes. Russell Peck, who'd tried to warn about thermal cycling. These were my people, the ones I'd kept safe for 18 years. Some of you wondered this past few weeks why I wasn't fighting the changes Preston was making, I said. Why I seemed to step back and let things happen that you knew weren't right. I chose to work within the boundaries of my job description instead of going beyond it. That was my decision, and I own it. But here's what I learned. I paused, making sure I had everyone's attention. Safety isn't about algorithms and predictive models. It's about relationships, experience, and institutional knowledge. It's about understanding that every protocol exists because someone, somewhere, learned a hard lesson. It's about respecting the expertise that comes from decades of keeping people alive, not dismissing it as old school because someone with a fancy degree thinks they can optimize it with software. The room was absolutely silent. Preston was going to be my deputy for the next 6 months, I continued. Not as a punishment, though I'm sure it feels that way to him, but because if he actually wants to work in safety, he needs to learn how it really works. He needs to understand that modernization without foundation is just recklessness with better graphics. I looked directly at Preston, who finally raised his eyes to meet mine. He looked young, humiliated, and scared. I'm not going to make this easy on you, I told him directly. You're going to work harder than you've ever worked at MIT. You're going to learn every system in this facility, understand why every protocol exists, and build relationships with people who don't care about your credentials. If you can't handle that, there's the door. But if you stay, and if you actually learn, You might become a decent safety professional someday. Maybe even a good one. The meeting broke up slowly, people talking in hushed voices. Terry caught my eye from across the room and nodded once, respect in his expression. Beth smiled, relief visible on her face. Russell gave me a thumbs up. Preston approached slowly after most people had left. "I didn't know," he said quietly, "about the relationships, the institutional knowledge, how much went into keeping this place safe. I thought I could make it better with technology. You thought credentials made you smarter than people who'd been doing this for decades," I corrected. "You thought experience was old school instead of essential. You weren't completely wrong about using technology. You were wrong about replacing human expertise with it. Over the next 30 days, I rebuilt what Preston had torn down. Restored inspection frequencies, reinstated manual monitoring checks, resumed monthly emergency drills, reconnected with Vernon and his team at OSHA. The corrective action plan I submitted was comprehensive, detailed, and addressed every violation Vernon had cited. When Vernon returned for the verification inspection, Preston was with me. Not running the inspection, just following, watching, learning. Seeing how Vernon asked questions, how he evaluated responses, how he distinguished between checking boxes and actually ensuring safety. Seeing how relationships built over 18 years created trust that no compliance software could generate. Vernon approved our corrective actions and lifted the operational restrictions. The violations stood on our record, a permanent reminder that they'd cost Coastal Chemical roughly $14 million total when all was said and done. Production losses, fines, remediation costs, increased insurance premiums. An expensive lesson. 3 months later, I was working sustainable hours, home by 1800 hours most nights, weekends actually free. Dylan's baseball season continued, and I was at every game. Watched him pitch a no-hitter in July, was there when his team won their division championship in August. "Dad, you know what's different now?" he asked one evening as we sat on the back porch. "Everything feels more stable, like you're not constantly waiting for your phone to ring." "That's because I'm not enabling a broken system anymore," I told him. "I'm doing my job well, but I'm not sacrificing everything else for people who don't value it." Preston, surprisingly, stuck it out. 6 months turned into a year. He lost the attitude, stopped mentioning his MIT degree, started asking questions instead of assuming answers. By month 8, he was actually becoming useful. Still had a long way to go, but he was learning. The board meeting in October was interesting. Dalton presented the financial impact of the OSHA violations, the costs of my return, the restructuring of the safety department. Then he presented the updated safety metrics. 0 violations since July, 3 near-miss incidents prevented through restored monitoring protocols, 2 equipment failures caught early through resumed inspection frequencies. Estimated value of prevented incidents, $35 million. One of the board members, Patricia Brennan, asked the question everyone was thinking. "So we paid $14 million to learn that we shouldn't have fired Garrett in the first place?" "Essentially, yes," Dalton replied. Though I'd frame it as we paid $14 million to relearn that institutional knowledge and professional relationships can't be replaced by credentials and algorithms. Patricia looked at me. "Garrett, what's your turnover plan? When you do eventually retire, how do we prevent this situation again?" "I've started comprehensive cross-training documentation," I said. "Not just procedures, but the reasoning behind them, the relationships that matter, why they matter, how to build them." Preston and 2 other junior staff are learning the systems from the ground up. Real transition planning, not just handing someone a title and expecting them to figure it out. The best response to being undervalued isn't anger or sabotage. It's demonstrating your worth so clearly that its absence becomes undeniable. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back, follow your job description exactly, and let them discover what they're actually losing. If you've ever been dismissed as old school, remember this. Experience isn't outdated methodology. It's accumulated wisdom that keeps people alive. The relationships you build over decades aren't inefficiencies to optimize. They're foundations that prevent disasters. And when someone with credentials but no experience tries to replace you, sometimes the best strategy is to let them try, let them fail, and let the consequences teach the lesson you couldn't. Subscribe if you want more stories about what happens when corporate arrogance meets institutional knowledge. Trust me, karma has a way of teaching expensive lessons to people who thought credentials could replace competence.